Hi, I'm Shannon Lenz, your spiritual fitness coach. My kids like to sing the Sunday school song, I Just Want to Be a Sheep. One of the verses says, I don't want to be a Pharisee because they're not fair, you see. Another verse says, I don't want to be a Sadducee because they're so sad, you see. The song led to a great conversation about who the Pharisees and Sadducees were. The two groups represented different schools of thought within Judaism at the time. In the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees were in the majority group and the Pharisees were in the minority. Most commentators agree that the Sadducees were more popular among the elites and the Pharisees were more popular among the common people. Our Sunday school song describes the Pharisees as not being fair, you see. And that works because the Pharisees were strict enforcers of the law of Moses. They even added to the law, piling on more and more rules, making righteous living seem impossible for the average person. Jesus repeatedly referred to the Pharisees as hypocrites because of their holier-than-thou attitudes and their inability to acknowledge their own sin and shortcomings. The Sadducees were known for denying the spiritual world, the afterlife, and the resurrection of the dead. They just didn't believe any of it. What hope could they possibly have? That's why the song quips, they're so sad, you see. Well, when we left Paul yesterday, he was in a Roman military custody in Jerusalem. The Roman tribune had bound him and had almost scourged him, but hadn't been able to get the information that he needed about why the Jews were so angry that they wanted to kill him. We pick up today in Acts chapter 22, verse 30 through chapter 23, verse 11. It's now the next day, and the tribune decided that since it was the Jews that accused Paul and wanted him executed, he would just let the Jewish council sort it out. He called for the Sanhedrin to gather, and he had Paul brought before them to stand trial. Once again, Paul had the opportunity to speak in his own defense. He said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." But apparently, Ananias, the high priest, disagreed with Paul's assessment of his own conscience because he ordered the guards to strike Paul on the mouth. Paul boldly pointed out the hypocrisy of the high priest's treatment. Before the law, Paul was innocent until proven guilty, and it was illegal to strike an uncondemned man. He said, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet, contrary to the law, you order me to be struck? Those who stood by said, would you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. You may be wondering, why does Paul say that he didn't know Ananias was the high priest? Well, we don't know for sure, but there may be several possibilities. First, Paul simply may not have recognized him. He had been away from Jerusalem for several years. Many people also believe that Paul had bad eyesight, which may have played a role here. Another possibility is that Paul was being sarcastic, as in, I couldn't tell you were the high priest because you aren't acting like one. Regardless, Paul realized that he was not going to receive a fair hearing. The past several days, we've seen a crowd turn on Paul, but today, we see Paul use the differences within this crowd to his own advantage. As a Pharisee himself, Paul appealed to his own party. Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. This stirred up an argument among the two factions that eventually became violent. The Roman tribune, who had hoped the Jews would clear up the problem with Paul, had to take Paul back to the barracks because he was afraid the Jews would tear him to pieces. So Paul ends up right back where he started, in Roman military custody. But he wasn't there alone. Acts 23:11 says, "The following night the Lord stood by him and said, 'Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome.'" Even when Paul's persecution made no earthly sense, the Lord was still with him and working through him. Paul had been a faithful witness in Jerusalem, and now he was about to be a faithful witness in Rome. Here's your challenge for today. Be a faithful witness to someone you've been praying for. But don't be a Pharisee. No one wants to listen to a holier-than-thou hypocrite. On the other hand, don't be a Sadducee either. In Christ, we have joy and hope. Instead, humbly share your testimony about how Jesus saved you from your own sins, and that because Jesus rose from the dead, you know that you will be raised too. And that's the message the world needs to hear.